let's give Dr. Holt a chance to talk. Great. So Dr. Holt, it's your turn. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much also for inviting me, and apologies for talking to you at a distance. It'd be great to be there. There might be a little bit of noise above me. I'm talking to you from my basement, and we're doing some construction up above, so apologies for that too. So this is kind of a real luxury that you've had a chance to read papers, and my big interest is to interact with you on some of the ideas there that you think are particularly apropos or challenging to cities and sustainability management within cities, which hasn't been my focus, but certainly there are some connections. So I thought rather than getting into any particular paper, what I'd do is give you kind of an overview of kind of my general point of view and what I'm trying to do in this research, and link it to sort of the, what are the implications for city sustainability, trying to move from consumerism to sustainable consumption. And just as backgrounds, I come out of marketing, a very kind of interdisciplinary approach to marketing across social sciences, critical studies, cultural studies, et cetera, and taught for 20-some years doing that, and increasingly do consulting. But a lot of my background is looking at consumer culture and consumerism. I used to edit the journal Consumer Culture, so it's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I've shifted over time from being, a very theoretically oriented person to try and take some of the theory that we work so hard to develop in our various disciplines and apply it. And my basic take is coming out of marketing, which is really, it's more of a strategic discipline. We're trying to shape behavior, usually to make money, but you can also think of kind of a critical approach to marketing. You can shape behavior toward sustainability, toward social justice, and so forth. So a lot of my work now, a lot of my influence comes out of social movements and politics into marketing. Now I'm very interested in sort of taking a particular marketing strategy approach, which I call cultural branding, and looking at some of the key issues of our time. And what I find over and over, frankly, is that a lot of the problems and struggles we have in some of the grand issues of the day, I think are strategy issues. They're not, you listen to Bill McKibben or others, and they talk about, there are these hugely resourced, fossil fuel interests, and we just have people power. And that's true to some extent, but there are lots of resources that have been put against environmental issues, environmental justice issues, at least, certainly since the Earth Summit, and we just haven't done a very good job. We haven't had, a lot of success, and I don't buy, that we've just been outspent. We've just, the problem is just, it's an intransigent sort of problem. People have looked at climate and why just, social psychologically it's so difficult. I mean, those are all true, but those are barriers that good strategy can help overcome. And so that's what I've been trying to do in my work for the last 6 or 7 years, particularly focus on, climate and overshoot issues, which I think are just, from my perspective, just some of the hardest strategy problems, that I've come across at least. So I'm trying to take a different approach, and the approach is necessarily critical of what is sort of the implicit strategy that I find in various efforts, whether it be at a city level, national, international, coming from foundations, coming from leading activists. I've tried to take a critical look from my perspective and suggest some alternative directions. I've come at it, I'm sort of divide the world into 3 pieces. So very simplistically, my solution, if I were to solve climate change and a few other problems that we're dealing with today, I find it very useful to divide into sort of 3 pieces. One is the real macro level of big externality issues around climate and overshoot problems, a kind of meso level, the markets and institutions level, which the bottled water paper that you've read, I believe, tackles, And then kind of, it's not quite a micro level, but I'd say more kind of the innovation and scaling kinds of issues around the transformation. What is transformation to what, and how do you diffuse, alternative economies and so forth? And that's the other paper that you read that critiques some of the sustainable economy work. So let me just quickly go through each of these three and try and make just kind of very quickly outline my perspective, and I'll just leave it at that and leave most of the room for discussion. So at the macro level right now, I'm working, you haven't read anything on climate movement and stuff, but I started in this issue primarily focused on why in the US we don't have an effective movement on climate change. Looking back to the cap and trade debacle of 7 or 8 years ago and forward. And I got interested in the issue because it just seemed to me that we were being outmarketed by the carbon fossil fuel right. We're getting seduced by these pretty simplistic from a marketing standpoint ideas. George Lakoff tells us we should use framing. All the foundations, all the, everybody throws in, hundreds of millions of dollars trying to outframe the opposition. From a marketing standpoint, we've been doing framing as one tool of, many dozens for 50 years. And so just, when you look at how smart and crafty the fossil fuel right has been, we need to improve marketing. So a lot of the work that I'm doing there is trying to figure out, and by the way, I don't see a lot of hope in being a contrarian in the People's Climate March. Naomi Klein's new book, I don't think it's great motivationally, but it's not strategically. I think it's way off. Tom Steyer's stuff that he's doing in Colorado and Florida, I think just doesn't make much sense, and it's actually backfiring here, and we're going to lose Mark Udall as their senator very shortly. So I'm going to set aside that issue, except to say 2 points from that kind of macro level that I think are relevant today. One is that consumerism, we usually think of as a negative, consumer society, but there's a part of consumerism that is also the model of social change that is sort of implied within consumerism, because consumerism projects us as these individuals who through consumer choice enact our lives, our statuses. Also, that's how we Western society have been trained that that's how we're going to save society. It's that buy a Prius, change a light bulb piece, which a number of academics have now critiqued. What I find over and over again in my research is that that is absolutely the dominant model of change still today amongst hardcore environmentalists. Here in Colorado, the main group that's trying to promote climate change, it's still focused on individual voluntary change. So for me, thinking strategically, that we have to get rid of that idea. A consumerist model of social change is a critical piece that we have to teach people that that's not the solution. So that's one linkage to consumerism. The other, interestingly, is that cities have been held up as a model of the incubators, the model of really doing innovative stuff on climate change over the last 10 or 15 years, given the gridlock at the federal level and internationally. And that's absolutely true. But when you look at the macro level, it's a problem because a lot of people, I live in Boulder, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on here. We're trying to take back the utility from Excel and on, but it's where everybody vests their energy and interest on the local food shed, on the local utility, and there's a disconnect then to any kind of national politics. So it's almost impossible, even though we have so many, very active environmentalists in Boulder, to get any interest in pushing, say a carbon tax or something at the national level. So to me, it's something that looks really good actually becomes this kind of strategic barrier. That's the macro. The other two sort of levels of analysis you have papers on, so I'm not going to describe them in a lot of detail. But the bottled water paper that I think you have hopefully, I think it would be interesting for people working in cities to offer kind of a market systems mode of analysis for you to get at problems or strategies, develop strategies around sustainability that's different from potentially or adds value to the models you use. So if you think about energy or agriculture or real estate or urban planning, what I'm trying to do in that paper is show that a lot of times unsustainability, whether it be carbon or water or whatever the particular issue is, gets locked into markets, and it's an institutional phenomenon. So it gives you, once you do the analysis, and each market's different, and so once you do the analysis, I think it leads to innovative solutions that might not be obvious, in the first instance. So for me, doing the bottled water paper, it was interesting to see how the big NGOs, through their critiques of tap water, actually helped to lock in the bottled water market, which wasn't, an obvious, finding going in, that we needed to sort of switch the discourse that the NGOs were propagating. So that's the kind of meso level piece. And then the micro level piece, which maybe is the most relevant to the cities, is really looking at what people usually call sustainable economy, or the sustainable economy movement. And there, again, I'm kind of looking strategically at how the movement works and why its strategy hasn't succeeded. And there I'm trying to point out that the movement has taken a very kind of myopic view of what sustainability is, which is very appealing to what I call sustainable bohemia. It's kind of more educated, more bohemian types, us living in Cambridge and Boulder and so forth, is a model that is very appealing to people who want a bit of bohemian, a bit of ethical consumption as part of their identity project. But in the end, I argue that these are people, upper middle class, myself included, who just aren't, we're not leaving the business as usual economy anytime soon. And so we're not the vanguard. And I think there's 40 years of evidence to prove that. Yet, if you look at, Gus Speth or Tim Jackson or Bill McKibben, whatever, they're very romantic ideas. I mean, I'm dreaming still of buying my 100 acres and, pasturing and so forth, my cows in a much more sustainable way. That model is not diffusing. It's not going to diffuse, I argue, because those of us upper middle class are locked into the business as usual economy, where the real opportunity is in what I sort of call Main Street, the new working class, who are really alienated from the current economy, who really need a new, an alternative model. And so that paper is an effort to push the discussion toward, pretty much aligned with, I think, what Julian's saying at a city level, push the discussion toward how can we, devise new economic models that are actually appealing to the working class, the working poor, and serve their interests and needs and an ideological fit with how they think about their lives and identities. And you get to a very different, I've done some research which I point to in this paper, you get to a very different place very quickly from what some of the leading lights in the sustainable economy movement are pointing to. And so I think that's something to talk about. Just two last points that connects to cities on that. So I was thinking about cities as incubators for this kind of new economy work, and I think it's the absolute appropriate place for this to happen. There are places like Eugene and Boulder and others. The problem, though, I was asking Dave about what is the typical model that I think most of you are sustainability directors from cities use for thinking about sustainable consumption, sustainable economy. And she came back and said triple bottom line. If you look quickly on the Eugene website, and that's triple bottom line, which something, I'm sorry, I apologize. I must have a gag reaction to that because I spent so many years in business schools with companies and in Davos, the triple bottom line is what we're after. And it's a very obfuscating sort of model because it's kind of a nice kind of bureaucratic measurement model, but it doesn't offer, there's no, if you're Eugene, Oregon, or some of the other cities represented, you want to hold up and push a transformative model for your city. We want to change things. And a triple bottom line just says, well, we're concerned about these three things. What the problems are, where we want to go. And you look below that in Eugene and all these other cities, there's lots of interesting things going on, but it's not sort of organized strategically to say, a real sustainable city would be this. And here's what's holding us up. It's actually these real estate developers or this tax system or whatever. We need to incubate some different ideas. I think there's, so that triple bottom line framework, I think, needs to be, rethought a bit to really think what's our strategic model. If we want to be leaders of sustainability, there's a real disconnect with that triple bottom line. The other piece, just quickly linking back to Julian, talking about sharing economy, collaborative consumption. This is another one that's really dicey. That whole ideology has been grabbed by Silicon Valley, et cetera, and is building out into these huge businesses, the Airbnbs and the Lyfts and the TaskRabbits, that are, probably not very sustainable. I mean, I just did a big project for Zipcar last year, and their founder is still going around the world giving speeches about how Zipcar is encouraging people to downshift away from autos. It's not true. Zipcar doesn't do that. And, neither does Lyft and Uber. And there's actually you have these kind of transportation deserts that these offerings create because there's not money to be had once you get into poor neighborhoods and so forth. And you don't want, those folks and those cars, joining the collaborative economy. So there's a real progressive alternative, which may be using, sharing cities as the brand instead of some of these others allows one to do. So I think, again, thinking very carefully and critically of where, your city sits relative to these, discourses that are really multinational corporate discourses, I think is really important. I'll stop.